bring them true selves, they can speak up with ideas, they can take risks, and they're not gonna have those negative consequences. We know that when people are in psychologically safe teams, they feel accepted, they feel respected. Again, they can be themselves. They can make mistakes, and they're used as learning opportunities versus punishment. So where did a lot of the original research come from? It actually came from Amy Edmondson. And in the 1990s, she was doing her PhD thesis, and she had a theory. And her theory was that high-performing teams make less mistakes than low-performing teams, which is a pretty simple philosophy, right? So she joins a big research group, and they were actually studying medication errors within hospitals. And what she finds, she gets her data back, and she describes it in her third book, and she looks at it, and her heart just sank. The data was correlated, but not in the way that she thought. The high-performing teams were making just as many mistakes, if not more, than the low-performing teams. And she's like, that's not right, how can that be right? So what she did is she decided she would repeat the experiment. So she repeated it on a bigger scale, she got her own research assistant, didn't tell him her theory, and again, she got her data back. And the high-performing teams were reporting just as many, if not more, mistakes than the low-performing teams. Why? Yeah, so the higher performing ones were more comfortable reporting them. What was happening in the low performing teams? They just weren't reporting them. They were hiding them, yeah. And the low performing teams where there wasn't that trust, they were hiding things. They weren't reporting things. And the high performing teams, they were used as learning opportunities. So Amy Edmondson's research actually got published in some academic journal that most people will never read, maybe you guys will, right? It wasn't until Google did their Aristotle project from 2012 to 2016, and they said, you know what, we're gonna find the best team ever. Like, we're gonna find the algorithm. So they looked over 180 different teams within the organization, and they measured age, education, experience, literally how often they had lunch together. I joke, probably height and weight too. I mean, you put it on a spreadsheet, like, they did it, right? And they got their data back. And again, they couldn't find what is that common thread between all of our high-performing teams. And that's when one of the researchers studied upon Amy Edmondson's research, and they said, that's it. Every single one of our high-performing teams has a high degree of psychological safety. That was the one big underpinning between all of their high-performing teams. People could come in, they could speak up, they could be themselves, they could take risks, and that was what they're great teams. And what was interesting is a lot of times we talk about organizational culture. But what they really found was that even within a large organization like Google, psychological safety is really at that team level. Because there was a wide disparity of psychological safety between their 180 different teams. Now since then, there's been a bunch of other research from Harvard Business Review to Forbes to Accenture, where they've really found that psychological safety is that key to performance. And actually there was an interesting study that Amy Edmondson did with a colleague a couple years ago in 2022. There's been a lot of push for the DEI initiatives, which are great, and what they found was that it wasn't just enough to have a diverse team. You also have to have psychological safety with that diverse team in order to have that high performance. So now Tim Clark was a researcher, and he looked at Amy Edmondson's stuff, and he said, okay, is psychological safety really an all or nothing thing? He was studying over in England, getting some advanced degree, came back to the States, and his wife was like, that's great.